Welcome to the Gentleman Project podcast. I am Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. Today we have Mark Massey on the podcast. Mark is a serial entrepreneur who I've been impressed with for a long time, but I got to know him a little bit more and realized how amazingly authentic and genuine he is when he talks to his kids and his interaction with other kids in the neighborhood. So I'm really excited to have him, Kirk.
Yeah, it's going to be a great podcast. Hope you enjoy. Please like and subscribe to the Gentleman Project podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and we will see you on the other side.
Mark, thanks for coming on with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Ever since we started this podcast, I've thought to myself, I've got to have Mark Massey because I've seen him interact with his kids and with other kids, and he is really good at it, quite frankly. And so, Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your family makeup, and a little bit about you.
All right. That's I actually my background is maybe a little bit different than you would expect. I was raised in Reno, Nevada, and my dad actually died in a car accident when I was 5 years old, and he was only 27. And I spent my entire life longing to have a relationship with my dad. And actually, I have to be honest, when I listened to the podcast that you had with your dad, it made me feel maybe a little robbed. You know, the fact that I never had those experiences with my own father really created some real deep feelings. So I appreciate what you both are doing. A little more background. My mom remarried, and fortunately, I had a stepdad that treated me like his own. He loved me like his own, and he ended up dying of pancreatic cancer. So they're both buried next to each other, and I celebrate both of their lives. My biological father, I don't even know what his voice sounded like. I have 12 seconds of him moving on an 8mm film.
Wow.
And so I've lived my whole life wanting to just make him proud. So it's been a great motivator. He was an exceptional dad, even though he didn't choose to die.
Yeah.
But it set the stage for my entire life.
Mark, what was his name?
Mark.
Really?
So
you were
I'm
named
Junior.
after him too.
I'm Junior.
Wow.
And how long ago did your stepdad pass?
He died in 2000.
Okay.
So I had some good time with him, and he did treat me like his own. There was when I don't think of him as my stepdad.
Yeah.
He loved me like his own, and I'm just so grateful for the role he played in my life. And I feel the same thing. I want to make him proud, and hopefully I have done that.
Well, it's such a common thing too nowadays, with divorce being a little bit prevalent too, that kids are being raised by stepdads, and they're kind of unsung heroes. When they're good stepdads, they really step in and do something exceptional with kids that aren't their own biologically and treat them that way. Like, they really know what those kids need, and that's something that nobody ever really puts on your plate when you're a young kid. Like, hey, someday you're going to be a stepdad. You need to prepare for this, to step up and be a dad to somebody who's not your biological kid.
Well,
it's an important job.
Can I just share one thing that when my mom started dating my stepdad, they got married very quickly, and my older sister felt really torn. She wanted to honor our dad, and right after they got married, he grabbed my sister, who, by the way, has cerebral palsy. So think about this. My mom, at 24 years old, was a widow, had 2 kids. One was cerebral palsy. Her mom died and her dad died. Her mom died of cancer. Her dad died of cirrhosis of the liver, all between 17 and 24 years old.
Jeez.
Didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, and just struggled and struggled and struggled financially her whole life. But she meets my dad, Scott, and they get married, and he grabs my sister because he knew that she was struggling, and went and grabbed all of the pictures that we had of my dad, and they built a photo album of my dad for her. And my stepdad actually was very, very careful to always honor my dad. And so I only called my stepdad Dad twice. I always called him Scott because he wanted me to honor my dad. But when I called him Dad, it was the greatest way of saying I love you than anything that I could ever say. And it was just amazing. You know?
You remember those 2 times?
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, you had a fantastic relationship, it sounds like, with Scott, your dad, and with your mom.
Yes.
Talk to us about the things that you feel like they taught you that are most important to you, or the lessons that you got from them that are most important to you.
Well, so Scott was not a very talkative, flamboyant, over-the-top personality. He was, quite frankly, he was just this quiet cowboy. And it wasn't words. It was action. You know, a couple things that I learned from him is I knew that he loved my mom and that she was the number one thing in his life. She was far more important to us, or to him. My mom was more important to him than his kids. And we all knew that. He has 3 other kids. I have 3 half siblings that I hate calling half siblings too. They're siblings. And so that's probably the number one thing that he taught me. My mom, she has lived a life of pure struggle. Financially, they struggled mightily. And my mom, I mean, she cleaned houses for, you know, that's how we survived for a lot of years, is my mom cleaning houses. And they taught me that you just roll up your sleeves and get to work. And those struggles, those financial struggles, were the most important things that I learned in my youth. You know, I always scrapped. I am a pure entrepreneur, and I always have been. And the difference with me, I think, as opposed to other entrepreneurs, is it was out of necessity. It was out of survival. But I look at it and I'm so grateful for those moments. Like, for example, I remember at 10 years old, I figured out that if I went down to the hardware store, I could buy packets of seeds, you know, that you'd plant in a garden, and I'd buy them for 10 cents, and I'd go door to door, and I'd sell them for $1. And everybody bought them from this 10-year-old kid, you know? So that was my first real foray into entrepreneurship. And I realized, you know, I ran a paper route for years, and I realized that's something that our kids' generation, there's something about paper routes, you know, collecting money, getting up early, physically working those papers.
Rain or shine,
5 a.m, collecting money. There was one guy on my route that I was terrified of. I paid for his paper for like 3 years.
Because you didn't want to go to his door.
Because I didn't want to go to his door. And he was a big, you know, he was willing to take my money, you know, and, you know, and I understood margin. I learned so many valuable lessons that our kids don't have that benefit. I think we're we're messing with this generation. They need to go and fold some papers.
The death of the newspapers has had ramifications for kids never becoming paper kids.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Scott, you've talked a little bit about your background, father figures in your life. Tell us about your family and your kids.
Great. So I have 3 kids. My oldest is Max. He's 21 years old. I've got a daughter named Olivia, but she goes by Via, and she's 19. And then I've got a 17-year-old daughter named Kate.
Okay, so you're a little bit ahead of Cory and I.
Yes.
In your fatherhood journey. You've successfully raised 3 teenagers, and you told us before the podcast, buckle up. What are some of the things that you learned raising teenagers that you would give advice to people who haven't yet of what's coming?
Buckle up. I don't feel like I'm done. That's for sure. I feel, actually my journey, I've got to tell you guys, I think what you're doing is noble and highly valuable. And I appreciate what you're doing. I said to Cory when we were walking into the studio, at first when he invited me to do this, I thought, why is he doing this? And then I listened to your podcasts and I realized you 2 are doing this because you want to be good dads, period. I see that. Whether anyone listens to this or not, you're trying to be the best dad you can. And I've known Cory for close to 15 years, and I know Cory Moore is he just wants to be a good dad.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
And so, and that's what I want. And my journey listening to your podcasts, I've gone through every emotion I can share, considering, am I a good dad? And in so many ways, I know I am. And others, I realize I need to be better. I just need to be a better dad. And so I've thought, what is it that makes for a good dad? And there are a few things that I've come up with that are just burning in my soul right now.
Yeah, share them with us.
Okay,
That'd be great.
The first one is, whenever I parent in fear, it never leads to a good result. And I want to expand on that in a little while. The other one is, I have battled over, especially during the teenage years and as my kids are now young adults, letting go of conditional love. I need to love them unconditionally and be okay with them figuring out their own lives. And that's a lot harder for me than I ever thought. It's been hard.
That's a bridge I think most of us have to cross, and nobody is looking forward to that bridge. But at some point, you're going to have to.
Yes. And even when my kids were young, I always thought, we're going to be the best, and look at us. Look at how well we're doing. Look at how we are honoring their agency, for example, by saying, which shirt do you want to wear, the blue one or the red one? And they choose the red one, and you go, look at us. And then you realize that their lives get more complex, and they're fighting to get out of the nest, and their insecurities are exposed. And whether you think that you're keeping them off of social media and controlling all of the different things that could impact them, you're not. There's all kinds of stuff happening in their lives that you can't control, and it's terrifying. But I realize that you got to just love them, and you have to earn that love while they're young, so that when they really do need you, they come and they trust you. The third thing, so the 3 things, fear, don't parent out of fear. It never leads to anything good. Learning to love unconditionally. And the third is to allow your kids to be their own unique self and allow them to fly on their own, in their own unique way. And I'll tell you, all three of those three things have been very difficult for me as a dad.
I wonder how many people are listening to this going, yep, those are my three things too.
Well, I'd love to hear some more how from you, because here's a what I think is a fantastic dad sitting across from me and Mark. And how do you find yourself going from conditional to unconditional, and how do you leave fear behind, and how do you have them become their own person? A little more how, I think it would be great.
Well, I'm just going to tell you, the other day, actually 2 days ago, I went skiing for a couple hours with my son, Max. And I've got to tell you, Max has taught me more than anyone other than my wife, my mom, and then there's Max. And we were skiing, and I was talking about your podcast with him. And I said, I need to share some things that we've experienced together. And it gave me an opportunity on a chairlift to be able to walk through some stuff that have been really hard for the two of us, and asked for his permission to share some of it. And he was completely on board. So to your question, how? For me, I've had to have moments where when I parent out of fear, instead of making it about my child, I got to make it about me. Plain and simple. I've got to make it about me. Most of this as a parent, I've got to make it about me.
Expand on that just a little bit.
So for example, my son, Max, when he was a senior in high school, I started to watch all of his friends start making decisions about their future. And Max, I saw, was not willing to go there. And it scared me to death. Is Max going to be able to rise up and find his own legs? And it was weighing on me for months and months and months. And then eventually, there was one day I came home from work on a Friday at like noon, and he was downstairs playing video games with some boys that I considered less than in my mind. I never said that, but I felt like these guys aren't going to help Max become anything. And they just sat and played video games. I went downstairs first time I went down there, I'm like, hey, there's this big world out there and you're not living in it. Shut it off and go do something more productive. And then I left for an hour and a half. I come back, they're still down there playing video games. I went down there again. I go get involved in some work stuff. An hour later, they're still doing it. I went down 5 times and asked them to shut down the video games. After the 5th time, I'm sitting upstairs and I hear a ping pong ball bouncing on the ping pong table. But it was clearly a ploy to make it sound like they were playing ping pong. They were actually just playing their dumb video games. And I felt the steam billowing out of my ears. And I went downstairs and I came unhinged.
We've all been right where you're describing.
Yeah. Well, I've been there a lot, but not like this.
This was a special time.
I lost it. And I scared the boys and they all scattered. And Max and I had a heated moment to the point that I didn't know if I could get him back. And it shook me to the core. I'll just say that. And to make a long story short, it forced me into a position where I really spent 4 to 6 months really looking inward. This was about me. This wasn't about Max. This was about my fears. This wasn't about Max. This is about me running away from Reno. That's what I call it. This had nothing to do with Max. And so I tend to go to my office before everyone gets there, and I do some stuff for me, right? And the first hour of every day became about my own analysis of me as a man, as a husband, and more importantly, as a dad. Plain and simple. And I really wondered if I was worth a lick as a dad. I felt like a failure. And that one day I was sitting at my desk, and I believe that this was divine intervention. There was this talk that landed in my lap that I listened to, and it was about a guy that had experienced a very similar situation. And Max was working as an intern for me at the time. And so he would come in, and I would grab him and try to navigate this complex situation with him every day. And after watching that talk, I broke down. I just lost it. And I realized that I was approaching Max completely in the wrong way. And so when he came in, I sat him down. We watched that talk together. And I just said, Max, I realize I owe you a huge, I'm sorry. He's like, well, you don't have anything to be sorry about. And I go, no. You need to know that I just love you. That's it. No strings attached. You go live your life. You just go live your life. And you make decisions. And no matter what decisions you make, I will be there. No question. Because I love you. And that's all that matters. That's it. And he said, okay, that's, whatever, like a teenager would say. And I said, no, you don't understand, Max. I love you with no conditions. It doesn't matter what you do. I will be by your side. If you make good decisions, I'll be there. If you make bad decisions, I will be there. And I'll help you figure out how to get through those decisions. But if you make no decision and you sit on a fence, I will take a hatchet to that fence and force you to either make a good decision or a bad decision. But I'll be there. And it changed my whole perspective on my role as a dad. That was a defining moment for me.
I really think that unconditional love, as you call it, and your kids knowing that it exists, and that even when they're going through bad times, that they know it's there, that may be the most important lesson or feeling or gift you can give your kids. And it's not always easy to go there. You have to have an aha moment. So I hope our listeners are listening to this right now and thinking, am I actually giving unconditional love? Because once your kids know that, no matter what they do, like Mark was saying, I think that's one of the most important lessons we can learn as parents, what you just described.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm convinced that when we parent in fear, there are conditions attached to our love.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were telling that story, Mark, I thought a lot about the times that I've lost my cool with my kids. And it's usually when I'm in a place myself that's not healthy.
Yeah.
And so when you said that the first time and I asked you to kind of expound on it, like tell us about that, like the details, because to me it sounded like backwards, like, well, I want to know more about that. What's your thought process? And as you explained it to me, I thought it is about me. Like when I mess up as a dad, when I motivate by fear and anger, it's usually not because of the actions of my kids. It's usually because I've had a bad day, or I've made a bad decision, or things aren't in line in my life. And it reflects on how I act toward my kids. Like, aha moment for me. Totally.
Yeah. I realize, I think I've heard the word on your podcast, stewardship, over and over again. Parenting is a thankless, hard, impossible situation that we've placed ourselves in. Many times I have felt like the only reason I am in this family is because I'm an ATM machine. I'm from Reno. Pull my arm, quarters fall out of my butt. I'm like a slot machine that always gives, right? I think a lot of dads feel that way, a lot. But stewardship, one thing your dad said was there's a big difference between being a father and a dad. So isn't it ironic that I feel like my father, who I don't even know his voice, has been a dad to me. And he hasn't been involved at all in my formative life, but he has been absolutely involved, right? Now think about our roles as dads. We're not in the business. I know the three of us are not in this to be fathers, biological donors. We are in it, and I don't want to be an ATM. And so I'm going to fight to not allow my relationship to be superficial, and it takes a lot of effort, impossible effort, to be a dad. And it takes even more humility and recognize this is about me. Most of the stuff that I get hung up on with my children are a direct relationship to my own fears, doubts, and my own, it could be my own pride, it could be my own lack of humility, it could be my own fears, it could be my own insecurities. But so as I see it, my children are there in a lot of ways to help inject truth serum into my life. And if I can choose to be, and then I have my agency. Am I going to fight to be the best dad I can be? Or am I going to just sit back in a lounge chair and hope that things work out? I've got to fight for them, right?
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned some of these things that are so hard as a dad and that sometimes you feel like the ATM. Are there some moments that you look back and you realize that your kids actually knew that it was working? Really, like you look back and go, oh, they do know that I love them. Oh, I wasn't just the ATM machine. Are there some moments that you can think of that are those moments where you go, oh, it's actually starting to pay off a little bit?
Oh, yeah. Just recently, I just turned 51 years old, and I got a note from my daughter who's in Kentucky on an LDS mission. And she sent me a note that is payday, right? It's you're my hero. I'm so grateful that I have a dad that is committed to be a person of progress, and the mentor that you've been to me, and the things that you've taught me, and those are so valuable. She's a much bigger communicator than Max is, for example. Max, if I can get him to go, dude, you rock, that means everything to me, right? And so I got to be able to measure that, right? So it's just, yeah. The fact that my kids are so exceptional, they're just great kids, and they're just navigating life, and they're figuring it out, and they make mistakes, and they're not perfect. But that's evidence that, and they're going to do stuff I disagree with, but I got to love them, and I got to put my fear aside.
Yeah. Mark, talk to us a little bit about your ability to connect with kids that aren't yours. Cory, I asked Cory a little bit about you, like on the personal side, and he said I've never met anybody that can communicate with kids like Mark. And so I want to hear a couple of tips, points that you can give us and our listeners about being that positive male mentor in other kids' lives, serving other dads by serving their kids, and maybe share a story or two.
Well, you know, I think kids are really smart. They got us figured out. You know, I know our kids collectively, they know our weaknesses. They know our shortcomings. They know us.
And when
right?
you recognize that, it opens a door, right?
Yep. And so I figure the very best thing we can do is just be authentic and real and recognize, you know, talk to these kids like you know, their opinions matter and that they can teach us something.
That is exactly how Mark is, by the way. That is a perfect way of describing how he is with my kids, with other kids I see, is authentic and real. And they look at him and they know, oh, you're not faking it. You're being real. You're being authentic. And I think that endears them to Mark. Sorry, Mark, keep going.
Thank you. That's a great compliment. And I was sharing this with Cory earlier. I had an experience with Max's friends once that really left a mark in my life. I mean, I've thought about it for years. And that is, I took Max and a bunch of his buddies on our boat, you know, and we had enough kids that we needed to split up in 2 cars. So Max drove a group behind us, and then I had 4 of his buddies in my truck with me while we were driving to the lake.
So Max wasn't in the car with you?
Max was not in the car, and that was an important thing because it gave me an opportunity to talk to some of his friends, and it opened the floodgates. And I asked very pointed questions that really, they just opened up to me. I asked the question, how is it being raised in the neighborhood you've been raised in? And I asked that question probably 3 different ways because they didn't first really get to. I wanted them to open their hearts up and tell me what they really feel, right? So I just I asked the question multiple ways. And eventually one of the boys said, I got a 32 on the ACT and it wasn't good enough for my dad. And then the next kid was like, how can I live up to my dad's expectations? And another kid said, you know, my dad has done so many big things in his career. I'm never going to be able to amount to what he's done. They all said something to that effect. And it made me realize, I mean, I'll just use I ended up having a long conversation with Max about this. I'm like, I feel like the way I was raised, I mean, I grew up really scrapping. It was hard financially. And I'm grateful for every ounce of it. I think that being raised in that environment's a lot easier than being raised in affluence where where your dad or your mom or both of them have cast a big shadow over these kids, and they feel the responsibility of being better than their parents. I think it's impossible for them. And I realized that's tough. That's really hard. And I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people that might be listening to this. You know, we think we're doing all the right things by putting so much pressure on our kids. And maybe it's the opposite.
I've had that conversation a couple times with one of my kids specifically. I remember now. And I said, my job is to make it so that you turn out better than me, that you do things bigger and better than I do. And that's probably placing a little bit of undue pressure because he can go do and be whatever he wants to be. But when he looks at me and my accomplishments or whatever I've done in this life, I'm putting a measuring stick up against whatever he wants to do. And recognize. Like, that is my job, right? I do want my kids to turn out better than me, but
Absolutely.
to vocalize that and say, hey, whatever I've done, you've got to do better.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I think that's been one of the main things that has been a major struggle for me and my son. I just want him to be the best he can be. He feels the pressure of being maybe better than me. And I don't think that that's fair. First off, he didn't come from my background. He doesn't even understand what I went through. And you know what I've learned? I don't understand what he's gone through. And his path is complex and difficult and heart-wrenching in its own way. And I even, when they were young, I came up with this, I thought it was a really clever way of teaching something to them. I'd say, you know what? We're not in the business of raising losers. I thought that was so funny. I realize now that just put pressure on them in ways that probably was counterproductive. What I do know is if they know I love them without condition and that my fears aren't being projected on them, which is a very hard thing for me for some reason, then when they really have a hard time, when they really are struggling, I've earned the seat at the table for them to come to me and say, I trust him. And that only happens, in my opinion, when we've been able to build a real trusting relationship. Just because we're their dads doesn't mean there's trust there, right? We certainly know that kids are, especially when they get into their teen years and beyond, our role in their lives changes dramatically. Their friends become far more important than anything. And if you look at, I've been considering one thing. If I've looked around at my kids' friends, these are great kids. It's interesting how many of them just kind of run amok, right? They're always free to do whatever they want. And I'm just wondering how much are we doing to build a trusting long-term relationship with our children? You know, that takes time. It takes fun. It takes playing hard, working hard. You know, it takes a lot of different things to get to be able to earn the seat at the table with our children, you know? And it's, you know, one thing I going back to my childhood, my dad hardly said anything, but I knew he loved me and that he had my back and that I could trust him, you know? And I did. I leaned on him. I still lean on him. He's dead. I still lean on him. So anyway, I feel like I'm talking too much.
Oh, you're great. Mark, is there what do you think your kids would say if they said, this is what Masseys are all about, or these are the lessons that I learned being a Massey? What do you think your kids would say to that question?
I would say they all would know that we have high expectations, both my wife and I, that we really are working to be the best we can be, that we really want to progress. We want to, in every facet of our lives.
And that's interesting because the conversation we've had today talks about, you know, where is that sweet spot? Because you can't set the bar so high that it seems unachievable, but yet you also don't want to say the opposite. You know, you're about progress, you're about high expectations, but whether or not that happens, I still love you is the message that I'm getting out of what you've said today, because, you know, it's a little bit of a paradigm, right? Where is that sweet spot between I'm going to push you and I'm going to make you into a better person than I am, but at the same time, I'm going to love you regardless what you do.
Yeah, I don't know where that line is. It's different for every kid, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The thing I think I've learned from this conversation is just that this is more about me than my kids. This journey is more about me being willing to be vulnerable and honest and with myself and realize that I project a bunch of stuff onto my kids that could hurt them or could help them, and I need to get rid of the hurt and replace with hope and faith and optimism and have a long-term view of what fatherhood is. Because whether or not they went out and weeded the yard the way I asked them to 15 different times probably doesn't really matter. Long-term, I've got to have a long-term view and realize they're going to go make a bunch of mistakes. And that is really what helps them figure out who they really are.
Yeah.
And I better be there I better be living my life in a way that they know they can always lean on their old man.
Being a coach and a steward, I think, is what you're describing, because what the origin of the Gentleman Project was to instill habits, because at some point you're not going to be there looking over their shoulder saying, hey, you missed a few weeds in the backyard. They're going to look at it and say, am I going to be proud of the job that I did today? If not, I'm going to look at it again and do it right. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we do as dads, is we coach, we mentor, and then we let them go.
Yeah.
And hopefully some of those things, some of those habits that we've taught them over the years with that relationship, that seat at the table that you talked about today, hopefully they come to us when those concerns are big enough to change the direction of their life.
Yeah. And that is where it's scary. When they're 10 years old and we're trying to instill in them some kind of level of discipline or whatever we're trying to teach them. That's all important, critical on a foundational level. But there's a point in time where they're going to be fighting to get out of the nest, and they have to go make mistakes. They have to. They have to make mistakes. They have to. And that is a beautiful thing. I think our generation as parents, we have done an exceptional job of building vulnerable relationships with our kids that maybe we wouldn't have had with our parents or our parents with their parents. The problem with the vulnerability thing, in my opinion, is now we're helicopter parents and we're not allowing them to make mistakes. And that's where they're really going to learn. Sometimes you just have to make a big old mistake and then go, I don't want the pain associated with that. But for some reason, we are eliminating that from the equation, and we are actually hurting an entire generation by doing it.
Yeah, what you've described today is exactly why we started the Gentleman Project and the Gentleman Project podcast, was to get these kind of insights that you've been giving us, so that dads can listen to this. I'm listening today and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I could do better here. I could do better here. I could do better here. So I appreciate you leaving such fantastic thoughts with us. I'm going to ask you a final question that we ask at the end of all the podcasts now. As we started the Gentleman Project, it was about, how do you raise a gentleman? How do you inspire your kids to become ladies and gentlemen? So what does it mean to you, Mark, to be a gentleman or to raise a gentleman?
I believe completely that to raise a gentleman means to raise up an individual that has confidence and believes in himself. I'm talking about gentlemen. And that requires a whole lot from parents, a mom and a dad, working side by side, loving that child. I look at it, for me, I had a hard life growing up in so many ways. But one thing I did have is I had parents who believed in me completely. They believed in me. And I believed I could accomplish anything. And I've exceeded my own expectations in so many ways because my mom and my dad believed in me. And Our kids need that more than ever. They're getting pulled in 18 different directions on social media alone. And we don't even know half of it. And so they better have refuge with their mom and dad. They need to know we love them and believe in them, and they will become. It might take them some time, and that's where the long-term view comes in, I think. But that's it.
It's a great answer. I love it. And every time I hear somebody answer it, immediately I think they think this is going to be a simple question to answer.
It's not.
And it is one of the most complex answers of any question I think I've ever been asked. And my 5-year-old was the one that asked it to me.
Oh, that's awesome. You learn a lot from a 5-year-old.
You can learn a lot from a 5-year-old.
Yes, you can.
Well, I like how you added the confidence and believing in them. I think that's something that we don't do a good enough job at least I don't, right? I know my kids know I love them because I tell them all the time, and I try to be unconditional with that love, regardless of what's happening in their lives. But I like the idea of saying, not only am I going to love you, but I'm going to inspire confidence in you. I'm going to inspire hope and faith, and this idea that you can do anything you want in life if you give it your all. I like that combination.
Yeah, but just a final thought. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like a complete hypocrite at times, right? I do, because I can say all this, but these are the things that I struggle with. These are the things that I am battling every day. And if I'm really in my moments of quiet reflection, where I'm really looking at myself in the mirror, these are the things that keep me up. These are the things. So I think as long as we keep them in the forefront and we're willing to be vulnerable with ourselves,
Absolutely.
Our kids are going to feel that and know it.
Absolutely. Mark, you brought a ton of value today. Thank you. And we hope that the listeners also got some great tidbits today. We will be back next Monday. We hope you've subscribed to the podcast so that you get it downloaded on Monday morning. Can be some Monday morning motivation for you to step up and be a great dad for your kids. And we will talk to you next week. Once again, thank you, Mark Massey. It's been a pleasure today.
Thank you.